Both please to the fifth chapter of Matthew. Put your finger there so that you can refer to it in a few moments. I want to do something that is pretty risky. I want to ask you for just a few moments, to think as children of the world. We've been talking these days about getting real, about the critical need for Christians in these days to become real about their faith, to become real about their lives, to become real about their commitments. I've referred to George Barna again and again. I'll refer to him again. He says that the curse of the church in this day is that it is play acting. That's called hypocrite. Strong words. I want to talk again with you this evening about getting real. Getting real about our values. What is it that matters to us? Now, child of the world, let me ask you, what do you have to be happy? Number one, have to have it. Money? Yep. That's it. Money isn't the cure for everything, but it sure helps. Rich. Money to do what you want, when you want to do it. Happiness means money. Child of the world, what do you have to be happy? Oh, you have to have laughter. Hilarity, jokes, jollity, Saturday Night Live. Happy. Child of the world, what do you have to be happy? You've got to get your way. You've got to get what you want when you want it. Child of the world, what do you have to be happy? You got to be full. You got to go to the Hilton buffet and eat till you can't eat anymore, till they have to wheel you out of there. Full. Child of the world, what do you have to be happy? You have to get justice. First sentence our kids learned was, it's not fair. Justice. What's coming to me? I got to have it if I'm going to be happy. Child of the world, what do you have to be happy? Oh man, you got to be beautiful. You've got to be the kind of woman that when you walk into the room, every man goes, You got to be the kind of man that when you walk into the room, every woman says, look at that. What do you have to be happy? You have to be a winner. A winner. Was it Vince Lombardi who said, maybe winning ain't everything, but losing ain't nothing? Did you ever see anybody jumping around saying, we're number two, we're number two? If you're going to be happy, you got to be a winner. If you're going to be happy, you got to be admired and accepted by the important people. Well, it doesn't matter if the nothings don't accept you, but the people that count, they got to admire you and accept you if you're ever going to be happy. Yeah, that's it. Money, laughter, your own way, fullness, justice, beauty, a winner, admired. Now listen to this nut from Galilee talking to his disciples with a several thousand large eavesdropper group. Guys, gals, if you're going to ever be happy, you got to be poor. If you're ever going to be happy, you got to cry a lot. If you're ever going to be happy, You have to not get your way. If you're ever going to be happy, you've got to be hungry. If you're ever going to be happy, you've got to give mercy. If you're ever going to be happy, you've got to care more about the inside than the outside. If you're going to be happy, you have to rather make peace than win. If you're ever going to be happy, and here's where we know the guy is off his rocker, you've got to be persecuted a lot. What? There must be something in the Greek. He didn't mean that. He didn't say that. And unfortunately, the way Matthew puts it, it gives us an out on some of them. You know, blessed are the poor in spirit. Oh, it's okay. I can be rich as Croesus and feel poor, and it's all right. No. Well, what is he talking about? He is flying in the face of everything the world tells us. The very things that we would say, you gotta have to be happy. Jesus says, you gotta have the opposite if you're ever going to be truly happy. When I was a child in Sunday school, and maybe you still do it, we had to memorize the Beatitudes. I always wondered what you had to be at. But I, as a little kid, didn't have the foggiest idea the radical, revolutionary things I was saying. I don't think I ever really understood it until I spent 3 weeks in Romania in January. Romania was and is one of the poorest of the Eastern Bloc countries. Only Albania is poorer. At that time, a good salary was $75 a month. You say, oh well, but things were also a lot cheaper. Not really. For a clunker of a car, and I mean a clunker, one that burned as much oil as gas, you had to pay $3,000. Let's put that in comparison. What proportion of our salaries would that be? How would that work out? $100,000 on a comparable level with an average salary in America. $100,000 for a clunker. And yes, you could own your own home. You could own a 4-room flat in a 10-story faceless apartment block that you can't keep warm in the winter and can't keep cool in the summer. Yes, you can own it for $10,000. Equivalent, $400,000 for you and me. You can understand why 3 and 4 generations of families cram into 4 rooms. My friend and I wanted to do something for the young couple in whose apartment we were staying, and so we went down to a store and got a real good price on some instant coffee. $3. We took it back, and Anita almost fainted. She said, you shouldn't have. No, that's too expensive. I did some rapid calculation. Yeah. In her money, it cost $90 for a jar of coffee. And for Christians, it was worse. Because you see, the persecution was not violent, it was subtle. And in some ways, that's the worst kind. Oh yeah, you can be a Christian if you want to. You just condemn yourself to a life of menial labor. Christian? No, you don't go to the university. Christian? You don't become a doctor. You don't become a lawyer. You don't become a teacher. You don't become a business professional. You are a ditch digger. You want to be a Christian? Go ahead. We're not stopping you. The man who is the president of the Baptist Union was a second-year law student the day he was converted. The next day, he was on the street. And yes, you could worship God in your unmarked churches, but have a prayer meeting in your apartment, and before morning there would be the knock of a rifle butt on your door. You see, they said, we knew that 1 out of every 4 persons was an informer. We were just never sure which member of our family it would be. Pastors, every Monday morning, met with their secret policemen and had to prove that they had said nothing subversive in the sermons the day before. And yet, in that January, 10 degrees outside, foot of snow on the ground, I sat on the platform of a church. There was no place else for me to sit. It held 700. There were 850 people in that building on a Tuesday night. Many of them had worked all day and then had walked, some of them 2 and 3 miles through the snow and the cold, and there they were. They weren't the beautiful people. Oh, there were some there whom we would think of as beautiful, but the vast majority, red eyes, gnarled hands, worn coats, lined faces, babushkas. And yet, I sat there and I could hardly contain myself. The singing. You folks sing well, you really do. But you can't hold a candle to them. They blew the walls out. And the praying. Boy, I've heard about Korean prayer meetings. I think this would match it. Everybody prays at once out loud at the top of their voices. And it suddenly struck me as I looked out at that sea of faces. They are happy. They are happy. They don't have anything. What's the matter with them? Then it dawned on me. They had to make a choice. And they made it with their eyes open. And they're just hugging themselves because they made the right choice. As I was preaching, I noticed a man with a rather wild face coming down the side aisle and speaking to my guide and cohort and friend, Johan Pea. Johan had given up a job as a secret mathematician for the government. They knew he was a Christian, but they so desperately needed a mathematician in the government department that they denied he was a Christian. But he gave it all up to become the administrator of the Evangelical Alliance for the country. And this man came down the aisle and he began to whisper to Johan, and Johan looked at him and got up and they went out. And on the way home that evening, Johan said to me, "Did you see the man who came?" And I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Did you wonder what was happening?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Well, he is a Christian who is working in the government." Now, this was 18 months after Ceausescu had been killed. And he said, today, a bill was put up which would limit our freedom. Johan, we must go, we must organize, we must fight this. He said, "Brother John, do you know what I said to him?" I said, "No, I'd like to know, though." He said, "I told him, when the wolf and the lamb fight, the lamb has only one weapon: a bared throat." Happy. Happy. Joseph Zahn was a pastor there in Romania. He had heard on the Voice of America radio station the broken promises in the Communist Manifesto. They went right down the list, every promise that Karl Marx had made and how it had been broken. And he said, as I heard that, I thought, but Jesus has kept every promise. And so he wrote a paper, the Christian Manifesto. And that thing circulated underground all over Eastern Europe. This was before 1989, before the wall fell, before Ceausescu was killed. And finally, they found out in Romania who had written this thing. And so they imprisoned him. 14 months. Day after day. Hammering, hammering, hammering. Look, son, all you have to do is admit that the CIA wrote this thing and gave it to you. That's all you have to do, and we'll let you go back to your stupid little church. But that's not true. How can I say what's not true? One day the interrogating colonel lost his temper, and he backed Son up against the wall and began to bang Son's head against the wall. You hard-headed Christian idiot! Why don't you understand what we're trying to do to you? And Joseph said, I screamed at the top of my voice, because even in the communist world, that wasn't legal, and I wanted everybody in that place to know what was happening. He said, that night on my cot, my Jesus came to me. And he said, Joseph, I thought you wanted to know the fellowship of my sufferings. Yes, Jesus, I do. That colonel was my agent today. He said, the next morning, I went in, and when the colonel came in, I said to him, sir, I want to apologize to you. What? Yes, sir. I need to apologize to you for my actions yesterday. I was screaming at you for what you were doing to me. And my Jesus showed me in the night. You were actually his agent to help me to know the sufferings of my Jesus. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Said the colonel mumbled something. Said, now let's get back to business here. He never laid a finger on me the rest of that time. He wasn't going to be the agent of Jesus. And then I think of Dr. Nick. Joseph's son eventually was exiled. They said, son wants to be a martyr. He wants to be killed. Well, we're not going to give him that pleasure, and they exiled him. Here was a church. The building held 1,000. They were having 3,000 in 2 services on a Sunday morning. No pastor. Nick Georgitsa was a lay pastor. A lay preacher, I should say. He was an internist. He taught himself English in order to read internal medicine books. One night he got a call at his home about 100 miles away from Oradea, where Joseph Son's church was. It was the head of the Board of Elders from the church. He said, Dr. Georgitsa, we have just been praying, and the Holy Spirit has told us you are our new pastor. Now, Nick is a redhead, and just as explosive as any redhead. And he said, what? You're crazy. I don't have a license as a pastor, so therefore I cannot legally pastor your church. And if I can't legally pastor your church, I can't get permission to live in Oradea. This is impossible. And they said, we don't know, but we'd like you to ask the Holy Spirit. He said, I really didn't need to ask him. I already knew. And so, for 3.5 years, Nick Georgitsa, an MD, a man of considerable standing in the country, never slept in the same bed 2 nights in a row. Every night he slept in a different apartment. On Friday night, he would drive back the 100 miles to his home, to spend Friday night with his family, and then Saturday morning would start out again. He said one Saturday morning he was just so tired, he crawled back in bed for a nap, and he was wakened by his wife shaking him. Nick, it's time. You've got to get on the road. And he said, oh, it's too much. I don't think I'm going to do this anymore. He said she stood there with her hands on her hip and said, man, they are your flock. Are you just going to leave them to the wolves? Get out of that bed. He said, my 14-year-old son stood in the doorway and said, Daddy, you always told me if you put your hand to the plow, you should never look back. Are you looking back? He said, what are you going to do with a bunch like that? I got out of bed and went. But eventually, the police caught on. And so he was dragged into the interrogation room. All day, they accused him of everything under the sun. And finally, at the end of the day, they said, all right, we're going to let you go, but don't you ever preach another sermon again. He said, gentlemen, thank you so much. May I preach you a little sermon before I go? And they said, what are you talking about? And he said, I just want to thank you. You've made me the happiest man in the world. He said, what? He said, you know,